As the final bell rang, the halls of Abilene High exploded with that chaotic buzz of Thursday before game day energy. Amelia and I dodged clusters of students heading for the main doors. She was mid-rant about a history project due next week, but I only caught fragments as we stepped outside. My eyes immediately went to the practice field. There he was, David, talking to Coach with a serious look on his face. The sun hit him just right, casting long shadows across the field. And then, as if he felt me watching, he looked up. A second, maybe two, passed, but it was enough. My stomach did that stupid flipping thing, and I must have smiled without realizing, because he frowned and looked away, reminding me of our unspoken rule. Out here, we were just two seniors going about our separate lives. "Hunter, are you even listening?" Amelia's voice snapped me back to reality. Yeah, something about Texas history." She narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced, but before she could grill me, we heard footsteps approach. Kevin. "Hey, Hunter." Kevin's grin was friendly enough, but I caught a hint of something else when he glanced from me to the field and back. "You going to the game tomorrow?" "Probably," I said, shrugging as casually as possible. My eyes drifted back to David. It was risky, I knew it, but something about seeing him out there felt important. Kevin followed my gaze, and his friendly expression faded. "Guessing the game doesn't interest you much, though." I forced myself to look at him, fully aware that Amelia's gaze had sharpened too. She knew about David and me. She was the only one, and while she hadn't said much about it lately, I could tell she was reaching the end of her patience. Kevin walked away looking disappointed as usual, though really at this point it was up to him to stop looking for something that wasn't there. "Hunter." Amelia's voice was careful, the way she spoke when she was trying not to start a fight. "I just don't get how you can live with it. Pretending to be someone you're not, pretending like he doesn't matter." My throat tightened. "It's not a lie, Em." "Then what is it?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, but the weight of her words hit like a punch. "Why can't you just—" "Look, it's complicated, all right?" I said more harshly than I intended. Amelia's face clouded over, and she crossed her arms, hurt. I wanted to explain, but a knot of frustration held the words back. Silence settled between us, heavy and cold, and I realized I'd managed to push away the one person who was actually there for me. I mumbled a goodbye and walked off, hands shoved in my pockets. By the time I reached the edge of the school grounds, the last echo of the day's noise had faded, leaving just the crunch of gravel under my shoes. Then, softly at first, like a whisper in the back of my mind, I let out a sigh, relaxing for the first time that day. The familiarity of his voice filled my head, pushing away the mess of the afternoon. We could hear each other. We could talk to each other in our minds. No one else. Just him. And just me. It started in 7th grade. Around the same time, we both realized the voice we heard all our lives wasn't actually our own. We didn't know what it was, but we never talked about it either. "Can I see you tonight?" he asked through our connection, the words carrying a quiet urgency. I took a deep breath. "Yeah, I'll be home." I just finished my homework when he scared the hell out of me. Out of nowhere, there was a full man standing in my sliding doorway. I gasped to myself when I realized the full man was just him. How much time had done. Much I was thankful for. I opened the door slowly, and he squeezed in, moving with that effortless athleticism he always had. Before he could say anything, I reached for him, catching him in a kiss. It was everything I'd been holding on to since that afternoon. A mix of relief, frustration, and longing, wrapped up in a second that felt all too short. But he pulled back, his expression tense. He used our internal magic so my parents wouldn't hear him. "Hunter, we need to talk." I swallowed, stepping back. "Yeah, I guess we do." We stood there in our own way of being silent, the words caught between us, just out of reach. I knew exactly what he was feeling, even if neither of us said it. The rush of sneaking around, stolen glances, telepathic conversations in secret. It had all been exciting once, But now it felt like we were running out of places to hide. And no, hiding within us was no longer good enough. David's gaze softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. I don't want this to end, Hunter. But I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. The weight of his words hit me, and I felt a twist of fear in my stomach. I wanted to tell him that we'd figure it out, that it didn't have to be this hard. But even I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. Instead, we just sat down on my bed side by side, our shoulders barely touching. Outside, the wind picked up, and I could hear the faint rustle of leaves blowing in brief whirlwinds of small chaos. I wanted to say something, anything, but the silence between us felt like the only thing that made sense. After a while, David turned, leaning closely. He kissed me again, softly, and when he pulled away, his eyes lingered on mine, like he was trying to say something he couldn't put into words. Then, without another word, he slipped back through the door, took one last look at me, then disappeared into the night. As I sat there alone, staring out into the dark, the quiet settled around me like a weight. I could feel everything slipping through my fingers. The next morning, Amelia waited for me by our lockers, her arms crossed as I approached. She raised an eyebrow, her expression softening just a bit when she saw me. "Hey," I said, feeling a mix of guilt and exhaustion. "Look, about yesterday." She shook her head. "Forget it, I overstepped." "No, you didn't, I know you're looking out for me." I paused, leaning against the lockers. "Honestly, you might be right. I think things with David, maybe they're reaching an end." Amelia didn't say anything, just nodded, her eyes searching mine. And for once, she didn't try to give advice. She just listened, letting me get it all out. But I barely had time to feel the weight of what I'd said before the school speakers crackled to life, reminding everyone that we had an all-school pep rally for the game against Lubbock. I sighed, glancing at the clock. One more class, then I'd have to endure an hour of forced school spirit. When the pep rally finally started, the gym buzzed with excitement. It was packed. Hundreds of students decked out in black and gold, all shouting and cheering as the drumline beat out a rhythm that echoed off the walls. I didn't care much about football. I was about to find a seat with Amelia when someone grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the line. Before I even turned, I knew it was him. David pulled me into an empty classroom just off the gym, closing the door behind us. His face was flushed, his expression intense. "Hunter," he started, then hesitated, his hand dropping to his side. "What is it?" I asked, already feeling a knot of dread forming in my stomach. He looked down, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want this to be the last time. I don't want this to be over." He took a shaky breath, and for a second, I felt his voice in my head, quiet and vulnerable. "Nothing's changed about what I want." "David." I didn't know what to say. All the words I'd been holding back came rushing up, but they stuck in my throat. Part of me was still afraid to hope for something we couldn't have. He bit his lip, the frustration clear on his face. Then, out loud, he said it. "I love you." The words hung in the air, raw and terrifying. I felt my heart stutter, everything inside me spinning out of control. I'd known it, maybe, deep down, but hearing it felt different. Real. David stepped back, the vulnerability in his eyes fading as he took in my reaction. Without another word, he left, his footsteps fading down the hall. When I finally pulled myself together enough to leave the room, I stepped out to find Kevin waiting for me. He must have seen the look on my face, because he sighed and shook his head, his expression somewhere between pity and irritation. "You know, Hunter, I'm not here to out you or anything," he said, crossing his arms. "But I just wish you weren't so hung up on a closet case." I felt a flicker of anger rise in my chest, but I kept it in check. Kevin didn't understand. He didn't know David like I did. He didn't know anything about what we had, and I didn't owe him an explanation. "Don't worry," he said, his voice softening slightly. "His secret is safe with me." I wouldn't even go that low. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. Finally, I found my way back to the gym, sliding into a seat next to Amelia. She gave me a questioning look, but I just shook my head, trying to focus on anything other than the ache in my chest. As the cheerleaders kicked off their routine, Amelia leaned over and whispered, "You're coming to the game tonight, right?" I hesitated, feeling torn. The last place I wanted to be was in a crowd of screaming fans, but something about the way she asked softened me. "Fine," I muttered, forcing a smile. "I'll be there." The stands were packed, the lights blazing down onto the field in a bright flood. Cheers and shouts rang through the crowd as the players jogged onto the field, Abilene's black and gold colors catching the glow of the stadium lights. For once, I felt a strange pull to actually watch the game, my eyes scanning the field until I found David. He looked focused and intense, his jaw set as he exchanged high fives with his teammates. Even though he was in his element out there, surrounded by friends and supporters, I couldn't shake the memory of his voice in my head, that quiet, desperate confession. "I love you." As the game wore on, it was clear both teams were giving it everything they had. The score stayed tight, each play more intense than the last. I found myself holding my breath, heart pounding with every tackle and pass. When the clock was down to the final minute, Abilene only needed one more touchdown to win. David's focus was absolute, and when he finally broke through the defensive line, dodging and weaving with a speed that left everyone stunned, he sprinted to the end zone, scoring just as the final whistle blew. The stadium erupted. The whole town seemed to be cheering as the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, declaring Abilene victorious. In that moment, seeing David's pure, unguarded joy, I couldn't stop the rush of emotions that flooded me. I realized finally that I felt the same way he did, that I'd been hiding from my own truth. Amelia nudged me, grinning. Look at him. I'd almost like him if he weren't forcing my best friend into a screwed-up relationship on his terms. I realized I missed something somewhere. I realized I'd been pretty dumb for so long. I laughed to myself when I realized how else could this possibly look from the outside. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice softening. I glanced back at David, watching him celebrate with his teammates. "You have it backwards," I said, almost to myself. I looked down at my hands, then back at Amelia. "There's nothing he wouldn't do for me. It's always been me. I'm the one who wanted to keep this a secret." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" I let out a slow breath, my gaze drifting back to David. "I didn't want to be a living cliché, you know? I thought keeping it private would make things easier. But maybe I was just scared." Amelia placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, her eyes full of understanding. "Then don't let fear hold you back. You already know what you want." As if he heard her, David's gaze shifted across the bleachers, his eyes meeting mine. In that moment, with the crowd roaring around us, I reached out to him with my thoughts. "I love you too, and I'll do anything for you too." I watched as the realization dawned on his face. Through our link, he asked, "Are you serious? Can I? Please?" "Yes." I lipped the words to his growing wide smile. Without hesitating, he broke away from his teammates, his eyes never leaving mine as he walked through the stands, stepping around people until he stood right in front of me. I felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on us, the entire stadium watching. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He reached out his hand to help me up. Then David leaned down to erase our height distance, his hand reaching up to touch my cheek as he kissed me, his lips soft and warm. For the first time, it wasn't a secret. It was everything we'd been holding back. All the unspoken words and feelings spilling over in that single kiss. Around us, a few gasps and murmurs broke the silence, but then a cheer rose from the crowd, starting with a few voices and building until it felt like the entire town was celebrating. I'm sure there were plenty of haters, seething in their bitterness, but we didn't care. I pulled back, my heart racing, and looked into David's eyes. All the fear and uncertainty melted away, leaving only the truth I'd tried so hard to ignore. I wanted this. I wanted him, all of him, without hiding or holding back. The crowd was still buzzing, the noise a mix of excitement and disbelief. But all I could see was David, standing beside me, his hand still resting on my shoulder as we took in the shock and acceptance that rippled through the stadium. Amelia, watching from her seat beside me, was smiling, her eyes shining with pride. I could tell she'd been waiting for this as much as I had, even if neither of us had known it until now. As the noise died down and people began to leave, a few friends from school came over, slapping David on the back, congratulating him on the game. Most people barely batted an eye at the fact that we were standing together, close and unhidden. For a moment, I just stared, stunned that all the fear I'd built up around us, seemed to dissolve as easily as mist under the stadium lights. David turned to me, his expression soft and full of relief. "Guess I don't have to worry about trying to keep secrets anymore," he said, his fingers lightly brushing mine. I laughed, feeling a wave of freedom I hadn't expected. "Yeah," I said, looking out over the emptying bleachers. "I can't believe it took me this long to get here. I'm sorry I made us wait so long." He shook his head, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "Doesn't matter now. We're here." His smile was warm and full of promise. "Now we just get to be us." We walked down from the bleachers hand in hand, slipping into the cool night air beyond the stadium lights. The cheers had faded, but somehow everything felt brighter and sharper than it ever had. Every small thing, our footsteps on the gravel, the distant sound of car doors slamming, even the smell of autumn on the breeze, seemed heightened, electric with possibility. I looked over at David, my heart swelling. "I feel like we've missed out on so much time," I admitted, feeling a pang of regret. "I wish I could go back and tell myself it was okay to just be with you." David smiled, stopping in the middle of the path. "We have all the time we want now," he said, pulling me close. "And besides, this feels like the start of something new, something better." We stayed like that for a while, standing under the stars, not saying much because we didn't need to. The quiet was enough, the world finally still and ours. As we walked off toward our homes, our hands still intertwined, I realized that for the first time, I didn't care who saw us. We weren't hiding anymore, and the town, the world, could know who we were and who we were to each other. And with David by my side, I felt more ready than ever to face whatever came next.